afternoon and welcome back from your lunch. Good to have you all here. My name is Meg Keane. I'm a senior fellow with the Pacific Island program at the Lowy Institute. It does say director there, but I've handed those reins over to Mihai Soro about a month ago, and some of you would have seen him in the last session. This session is about geopolitics, but we're going to do it a little bit differently and take a different lens. So we're going to turn it a bit on its head from the last session. If you were in the last session, it was looking at how major powers are seeing geopolitics. And this session is going to be, and I will introduce them in a moment, with some leading thinkers from around the Pacific, putting a Pacific lens on how geopolitics is being felt in the region. In the last session, there was a line that said, the role of the Pacific leadership is setting the course and conditions of geopolitical competition. And that's certainly the ideal, and there certainly is a lot of opportunity from geopolitical competition. But I think we also have to acknowledge that the huge amount of attention, the large flood of money into this region can be distorting, can be hard to manage. I've just been in the North Pacific, and they're at the point where they're going to give some money back because they can't move through it fast enough. And it certainly does distort priorities. And in fact, moving around the region, people talk about this huge influx of money, and the money often for geostrategic or strategic interests can have a corrupting influence and put more pressure on the system to try and get more accountability in the system. We've seen at the last Pacific Island Forum just how challenging that can be, where there was a bit of confusion about who even issues the driver's licenses to be in the lane, let alone who's going to be in the lane. And then we also had sort of jack-in-the-box diplomacy, where China, who wasn't part of writing the Pacific Island Forum communique, went on the media to say it was wrong and it needed to be corrected. Whether it was wrong or not, and it was corrected, but I think the key point here is this pressure is intensive on this region, and they're juggling quite a lot in order to achieve their goals. There has been a push for greater policy alignment. We've seen the 2050 Blue Pacific strategy. We've seen medium-term development strategies. We've seen strategic national plans. But we also know, and I think it was exemplified in the last session, that we can get blue washing, green washing, claims, declarations of alignment when the alignment is pretty thin. And the Pacific is having that challenge of making sure the alignment is there and their priorities, Pacific priorities, come first. We also know that, and it's come up again in this conference, is the asymmetries in information, whether that's with climate change or resource management or resource access agreements. It's sometimes hard to make decisions in very short time frames when you don't have enough information about the risks, the opportunities, or what alternative pathways you might choose to go down. Finally, and it's an issue that we'll delve into, I think, a little bit today, is this problem of we focus a lot on the geopolitical competition between nation states. But it's also the case that geopolitical competition is happening amongst the non-governmental organizations, and it's happening commercially. So there's quite a bit to unpack there. The way we're going to do this, we decided we didn't want to do presentations. We wanted to have a talanoa. We wanted to have a conversation amongst us. So we're going to change gears on, I guess, what you've been used to for some of it, though we have had already some sessions that have been discussion-based. So with me today, and I think most people will know most of the people up at the front here, Ruth Lelaquila, who's the chief executive of the Solomon Islands chapter of the Transparency International. That is an organization that is dedicated to promoting accountability and combating corruption and holding power to account. But Ruth hasn't just sat in the non-governmental world. She's also been a permanent secretary for more agencies and departments I care to list, but culminating in the appointment as the Chief Secretary to Cabinet in Solomon Islands. So I think she has a fair idea also how things work in government. And I just learned that she's also been involved in her history in the private sector. So she's sat on many sides of the table. Also, my colleague, Oliver Nabetau, who is the Pacific Fellow at the Lowy Institute, where I work. Oliver gets a gold star because he literally has just got off a plane from Papua New Guinea, where he spent several weeks in Bougainville. So we will have a little bit of a chat about Bougainville and geopolitics and how they play out there. But Oliver has also had the privilege, perhaps, or the opportunity to sit in as a member of the Public Solicitor's Office at P&G, and he was part of the negotiations that put together the United States Defense Cooperation Agreement, and part of the negotiations that put together the P&G Australia Bilateral Security Agreement. So we've talked a lot about security pressures, putting the Pacific's national interests first. That will be interesting for us to delve into a little bit there, as well as your work on international climate change. And finally, Aka Riman, who is an ANU PhD candidate here, looking at that area of interest that comes up again and again of labor mobility, climate change, and economic development, and whether there is a nexus between those and how we get complementarity there. But again, Aka has a long history. She has been a senior member of the Kiribati government and has also worked from the World Bank. So I think you'd agree, we've got a panel who really understands geopolitics from many angles and is able to comment well on it. So I am now going to sit down, grab a microphone, toss the first question to the panel, and we're going to start a conversation. Okay, excellent. I hate microphones, but I'm going to persist with it for the interest of recording. So I wanted to begin, Ruth, on my right hand here. You are the Executive Director of Transparency International Solomon Islands. And I talked about a lot of time with the huge flows, they're at record levels, going into the Pacific Island countries. There can be issues of accountability, transparency. In the words of one person I was interviewing out in the region, sometimes politics gets put before policy, sometimes political interests before national interests. So I wanted to begin by just asking you how you see geopolitical competition affecting accountability and transparency in your area of the world.
Thank you very much, Meg, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. I work with Transparency Solomon Islands, and we are also on the forefront of this, the tricks that our government does. And yes, indeed, there are huge amounts of money being promised and being poured into a country. We were in the global media and every other media for all the wrong reasons, because of the choices that our government, the government that we elect, made without the consent of the people, did this thing. But this huge amount of money is poured in. Some of it have already arrived, and they arrived to pay politicians to ensure that they stay within government, that these geopolitical people who are involved in there to stay in power, to perform the wishes of those. So 250,000, 200,000. This is open information inside my country that is paid to members of parliament to make sure that they don't run away from the last government to complete the job. But we also have others in their response to this twitch that we have in Solomon Islands and their own geopolitical fights. The active response to what is happening in the Solomons has forgotten the people that in Solomon Islands, there are human beings living there. And they have forgotten the local factor or us, the people that we are living there. So it's all upstairs and not anything. We don't know what's happening. At the moment, our country has signed more than 15 MOUs with I don't want to say China, but I want to say CCP, China Communist Party. I don't have any problem with Chinese people. And all of those, there is no accountability, there is no transparency. We know nothing about how much is in those agreements, and we know nothing about the terms and conditions of those agreements. And at the moment, all of the aid coordination that you fall into the country goes through the Ministry of National Planning and Aid Coordination. For China, this is not the case. Solomon Islands, we are friends to all and enemy to none. But there are some more more special than others. So they have their own office inside the Prime Minister's office. That is where their aid goes through. So these are the things that we are questioning, and this is with regard to transparency and accountability. I think all of them who are playing this geopolitical game inside our country, they're not transparent, they're not accountable. They're all playing whatever they want to play, and they are not. What's happening in our country is that we don't know the terms and conditions of those two. We only know what they want us to know. So it's very difficult for our professionals and our other people to have an opinion so that we can advise our government or anything. So accountability, transparency, and all of that has gone out of the window. And we're fighting very hard to see, we have many keyboard warriors. Sadly, they do not come out. And I am very sad to say that these are our academics, these are our professionals, but for some reasons of their own, they are just behind the keyboards of the computer and saying this. And the government does not listen to anything inside the computers. Of course, transparency, Solomon Islands, gets discussed in Parliament for one full afternoon for the things that we say. And that is good because they are listening. And we need more people. And I think the approach that is being done at the moment with regard to transparency and accountability is the wrong one, because they are not doing it with us. They are doing it for us. I think if you think back on the World War II, like the previous speakers have said, it is the local factor that made the difference in the outcome of the war inside the Pacific. So I'd like to add there. Thank you, Meg.
Thank you. Ollie, did you want to add anything from a lawyer's perspective of can law help us get that transparency, or does that too have its problems of people dancing around it?
Yeah, I guess I can just add on just one point on that, but in trying to encourage accountability and transparency, we've seen sort of we've had experience over in PNG about ICAC as well, with the ICAC laws being passed. But I think the biggest problem is, like, we can have very good laws, but if nobody really has the drive to implement or sort of prosecute under these laws, then they're just pieces of paper as well, and that seems to be a much larger issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Inside and out. I just wanted to go on, Ruth, one more question with you, because when we were talking, you mentioned the role of media. And media can be a very good way of channeling messages and getting information out. But it seems Transparency International's hit some road bumps in conveying its messages by the media. And I wondered if you wanted to elaborate a little bit on that before we move on from this transparency issue.
Thank you, Meg. Transparency Solomon Islands as a youth program. That youth program is called Youth for Democracy Camps. In there, we deal with, we invite youths to come to a one-week camp so that we go through what it is that we needed to go through with them. Applications for that camp reaches 300 youths, but the number we can take is only 25. So through these youths and the work that they do during the time that we have this security pact agreement, as well as the extension of the Parliament, Transparency Solomon Islands organized for the young people that came through our program to have a talkback show on the radio, to hear their views and their opinion, because it matters. And in that youth, the slogan is youths of today, leaders of today, to share that across the nation. And we had that program, and what happened was, what was coming out of these young people's voices is nothing reflective of what Transparency Solomon Islands does. It is their own opinion, and it was really, really amazing. We had phone calls from Temotu. We had it from all over the country congratulating, very happy about these youths. Then we had another one for the extension of the parliament. That happens too, where the youth send out a message to say that we are the ones that can help you rebuild the country and everything else. You cannot do it without us. We are here to help. 2 weeks after that, the government of Solomon Islands, the executive government that is, removed the state-owned enterprise status of our only broadcasting service and put it completely under the office of the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister. And there is a standing instruction there that for Transparency Solomon Islands to run any more talkback show, panel discussion on open air and air it in public, we have to invite them to be in the panel. We are very happy with that. And so we did that. Up until today, they have never responded, and that only applies to Transparency Solomon Islands and not any other clients who wants to use this state-owned, this is Prime Minister-owned broadcasting service that we have. Sorry. Yeah. Well, they know I said these things, so don't worry about it. So, and even the newspapers, our newspapers, one was given 1 million and all the equipments by China, and the other one was given drones and all of that. So any article we write, we send to the media. It does not get published when it should be published. It's either you have to wait for 3 weeks before it comes out, or it does not come out at all. So this is our capture that is going on in the Solomon. This is what's happening. So you cannot inform people about what's going on. People cannot discuss important matters such as the new constitution that they are coming up with, the Republic of Solomon Islands draft constitution. This needs to be discussed in public. But if it is Transparency Solomon Island that is leading it, we can't do it. They won't let us, and then nobody else is doing it, so we are stuck. Thank you.
So there's one challenge, and that's with development, it's with transparency, it's with accountability. And another challenge, which we've heard a lot about at this conference, and I think it's worth putting a magnifying glass on a little bit, is security agreements and defense agreements. And of course, recently at the PIF, we have the new Pacific Policing Initiative. And we heard in the last several sessions about military bases, red lines, red fogs, and I guess the motivation behind these agreements. I wanted to get some insights of what it looks like on the ground when a country tries to negotiate a defense agreement with a major power, and when perhaps the concept of security of that major power is different to the concept of security that the Pacific Island countries might have. So Oliver, I'd like to invite you to reflect on your experience in both trying to get or securing a defense agreement both with the United States and then following that with Australia.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I actually also just wanted to add, Ruth, in 2013, I was also a YDC participant for PNG when they had it during high school, so it was really cool to hear that. But yeah, so thank you. I think the answer can sort of be addressed through addressing different ways. I think PNG has tried to harness this geopolitical engagement, and now it's not as clear cut as a lot of I think Pacific countries would like it to be. Now there's security agreements that are sort of tied to development as well as vice versa. So I guess if you're doing a bit of a report card of what has happened recently and which has sort of led to the security agreements, I guess PNG has been willing to cooperate not just with the West but with other countries as well to sort of achieve, to enhance geopolitical engagement as well as achieve and reap the benefits. So aside from the national security benefits or the agreements, I guess I'll talk about after, there were also other forms of development assistance that have been enhanced in recent times. Like I said, with China as well, providing assistance through the development of infrastructure. There's something called the Erevu hydropower plant that was just established. It was constructed by the Chinese to assist in addressing the energy security issues outside the capital in Port Moresby. There was also a country package announced last year at COP28 with France and the European Union providing, I think it was around 100 million US dollars to assist Papua New Guinea's conservation efforts. And more recently as well, we've seen in the news 600 million Australian dollars given as budgetary support to account for the budget shortfalls by the PNG government, and even progression and near finalization of the 600 million, I think, over 6 years for the NRL bid. So it's taken very wide. It's no longer really just limited to mainly security cooperation. But with that being said, you know, I think security agreements do need to be considered in their own in their own merits, because every time a deal is struck, it alters how other countries respond to it and the form of engagement given in response to Pacific Island countries. And I think, without getting myself into too much trouble, because technically I'm still seconded from the government of PNG, so I'll try and answer to the best that I can. But I think both of, and what you mentioned, sort of that misalignment in what is perceived to be a security threat. The agreements, both the DCA and the BSA, are really good examples of, I guess, a compromise being reached, where each party seems to walk away with something that benefits them, even though the footing that they began on was sort of misaligned. So, for instance, I guess the national interest for the Defence Corporation agreement for the PNG government was it provided, you know, much needed injection of resources into military infrastructure redevelopment. PNG, as a developing country, obviously is not immune to having a shortage of resources, and usually its resources are stretched thin, and military, pumping money into the military is not always given the first priority. There are also greater opportunities that provide for joint operations and capacity building, like we're seeing through Operation Tamiyok Strike with the US military and the PNG Defence Force. And even to a lesser degree as well, cooperation for civilian law enforcement agencies. At the same time the DCA was signed, there was also the shipwrighter agreement that was signed, which provides for cooperation, a framework for cooperation, with the United States Coast Guard and other civilian law enforcement agencies of Papua New Guinea to combat IUU fishing, as well as other transnational crime. And even the bilateral security agreement as well. I think it was quite significant because it was a step it's the first time that PNG has signed an agreement that tries to look and expand the scope of cooperation to consider non-traditional security threats as well. And this is stuff like climate change, economic security, even cybersecurity as well. And we're seeing some of the benefits so far with the bilateral security agreement through the assistance package that was given by Australia at the signing of the agreement, as well as, I think, the plans to establish the regional police training center over at Bomana. So I guess these are, and these are sort of the benefits that we've seen, and this is sort of what has gone into the benefits that are now being reaped for these security agreements. But I wanted to also share some reflections, really jumping off of what Ruth has said as well. And I think this is really from observations that have been made from my recent trip back. But it seems to be that, you know, I think the initial sort of honeymoon phase of these geopolitical engagements is coming to an end. And I think a lot more questions are being asked, not just within, not within the government, but I think a lot of public perception as well. And I guess in my mental timeline, we have now a longer time period to look back on for this sort of newer, enhanced form of geopolitical cooperation, whether you consider it as being from 2018 when PNG hosted the APEC meeting, or even back further, 2013 when the BRI was launched. this extended time frame now provides a backdrop for countries to look back and really assess the effectiveness of the type of these arrangements, and not just purely in security, but in in terms of development assistance as well. And I think one of the main things that is being scrutinized is the justification for entering into these agreements and whether or not they do address the issues in which they had, which was really the incentive for them to sign under. Firstly, I think one of the things that's showing over time is that geopolitical engagement and how it's managed and public perceptions is not always equating or does not necessarily contribute to securing political power. Unless, of course, it was done in a manner like Ruth had mentioned, the type of geopolitical engagement that's being done to buy political power. But we can see it now, even in PNG as well. Currently this week, we're having a vote of no confidence that's been put, and it's been passed through the Parliamentary Business Committee, so there'll be a vote on it next week. Secondly, I think the signing of these agreements, we signed 2 major security agreements last year in Papua New Guinea, and this is quite, in a PNG context. Despite them being signed last year, one, we had the riots on the 10th of January in the capital city. We had the massacres over in Enga, and we also had, recently the violence up in Sipik as well. So over time, I think public opinion on geopolitical engagements might change when questions are really asked on how well these security agreements effectively combat the issues that they initially signed for, because, for PNG, one of its biggest security threats is internal security. I think it's just the form of geopolitical engagement going forward. Like with the policing arrangements, while there may be sort of a boost in capacity and a boost of numbers to address the security issues, I think a greater look now has to be taken onto what are the underlying issues anyway, for why a lot of these internal security issues are arising.
I'd just like to add to what is said and also what I've said, is that now that we are here to look back, I think there are opportunities as well in what is happening there. And so we need assistance inside Solomon Islands to work with the others, because what this geopolitical competition has done to us, especially in Solomon Islands, it has made us, it has forced us to make a choice. What to fight for, who to fight for, and to take sides. But I think this should stop now, and then let us settle down, and if you really are genuine, then help us to see how we can realign the huge amounts of money that is promised to us, I haven't seen it yet, to actually deliver for the people of Solomon Islands and not deliver in the case of you're competing. For example, the huge amount of money that you're going to pour, or that is being poured into infrastructure, it is for what? What is it going to, under what principles? So in my thinking is that, okay, you're pouring money into the infrastructure. Is it for decentralizing economic development to the provincials so that people can now find their economic niches to take part in economic and grow our economy? Or what is it for? Or is it for just your competition? Those are the questions that we're asking.
Thank you. I think this brings us to an issue we were talking about, Aka, is this delicate balance of power, which Pacific Island countries are having to engage in if they don't want to choose sides, if they want to try and be friends to all, or at least friends to those they choose to be friends to. They've got to do this very delicate act of balancing powers and putting their national interests first. So I'd like to hear from you, from a small island state perspective, of that balancing act, and how's it going in Kiribati, which is, well, really in the middle of finalizing their election in a political battle on the ground.
Thank you so much, moderator. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it, a delicate act, because I feel that this geopolitical competition is really encroaching on our ability to not just coordinate ourselves, but manage our interest against the interest of the superpowers, right? And then we've heard in the previous the speakers' statements about how this is really driving the interest of the global powers instead of the national interest. And so for Kiribati, it's a delicate act because now that we've come out of the first cycle of elections and we're waiting for the presidential elections, when you see things like the announcement of a mission ban, that for me triggers a red flag, because it what goes back to what Ruth was saying earlier about the freedom to be able to speak up and exercise your right to say something about the government that you're voting to place, or whether the government is not living up to what they promised to implement. It's a delicate act also because I feel that in Kiribati at this point in time, democracy is really going to be up to how the powers pull each other, right? So regardless of whether we align to China, the US or Australia, it really is subject to how this infiltrates our systems. So whatever actions translated from these diplomatic partnerships is going to be the concern for me. I guess this is a personal perspective, right? And I guess I also come onto this from the back of the previous developments, if I may. And as an Kiribati, I've been observing very closely how we've seen a lot of changes happen in country, and these are already out there. Everyone knows about this. We follow this in the media, but it's a question of whether this is really addressing our national needs, or is it addressing the interest of others. When you spoke about friends to all, I think for me, the way to frame this is really aligning to who you see you get the most gain from. Yeah, so theoretically, friends to all is what we want to be in the Pacific, but whether it's like that or not, I think it's really up to the country to decide, and this is their sovereign decision to say this is the friends that give us the maximum support or the most aligned to our national priorities, and so it's framed in that way. But yes, I think I want to also add to what Ruth and Oliver just said about transparency, but also what's driving geopolitical interest. And as I reinforce, the geopolitical engagements in Kiribati are really driven by these external forces, not internally. And for me also, I'd like to look at it in terms of yardsticks and what people are saying on the ground. The first yardstick for me is really a measure on sovereignty and democracy, right? And so when you don't have that freedom to speak up or say things that you want to say in country, I think that really goes to say how much people have the freedom to express on this. But also democracy from a Kiribati point of view is really the ability for government to deliver on equitable access to resources, and we spoke about the security interest in Papua New Guinea, the security agreements, and in Kiribati that's the same for us. We have a very different concept of peace and security, I guess a more softer form of security. We're worried about climate change, we're worried about health and education, and not so much militarization or policing or defense. So I hope that answers the question, and I'll stop here.
So we've heard a lot about the complications, and I'm wondering, there's obviously opportunities. There's some advantages of this attention if you can harness it well. And I was interested to hear, because Oliver, I know you've just come out of Bougainville. Bougainville's a flashpoint, obviously, for Papua New Guinea, but it has huge development needs if it is going to walk its path towards independence. And I'm interested on how geopolitics is playing out in Bougainville, whether it's going to give it opportunities for different independence pathways, different possibilities for foreign direct investment, or is it putting strain on a system that's already near the breaking point and trying to find its way forward?
Yeah, thank you. The trip that I just got back from yesterday, it was really good. I think overall it was an excellent learning experience for the in-country sort of field research. And it was nice to be back home and really benefit from the wide array of perspectives on the issue of Bougainville's prosperity. So I think to answer the first question on sort of how Bougainville can sort of try and utilize expanding these external relations, I think particularly in the Bougainville situation, or in Bougainville circumstances, I think it's important to note that external partnerships or really engagements with foreign entities was not necessarily a power that was accorded through the peace agreement. It's still something that's retained with the national government. And I think successive Bougainville governments and leadership under Bougainville have done well to sort of respect that demarcation, and noting that a lot of the external partnerships come through the national government first. I don't think that this is in a manner of sort of gatekeeping by the national government, but I see it as a positive, as it's sort of an added layer of protection for Bougainvilleans and the Bougainville government. On the particular issue, though, of attitudes towards expanding the partnership, my personal observation from the recent trips is that, as far as development aspirations are concerned, Bougainvilleans are willing to partner, I guess, with any sort of external or development partner as long as they can deliver the type of assistance that is needed and what is being asked for. Whether or not Bougainville will play the leveraging tactic that sort of talked about earlier, it's a little bit too soon to tell. But there is a political sort of timeline that's been set to have independence before 2027, so that may play a factor in influencing their approach to external partners. This, once again, but if you sort of look at it a little bit objectively, this may be unlikely. Last year, the ABG, the Autonomous Bougainville Government, had endorsed I think it's the Bougainville Integrated Sustainable Development Plan, and a key component of that was the SDP budget that it wanted to pass. And if you look at the SDP budget and how they see funds coming in for development projects or achieving its development aspirations, only 5% is being accorded or expected to come from conditional grants from donor partners. And I guess on the second part of that question, on really what the role that development partners will play in this and sort of independence pathways. Once again, my own personal view is I think the emphasis should not necessarily be on independence pathways, but more the development pathways. As you said, there are high development needs that are needed on Bougainville, and there's a narrative that seems to be passed that independence will act as sort of a solution for all the problems that we face on the ground, even though it's like a panacea. There's also a narrative that independence and development are synonymous. I personally don't agree. Independence or obtaining independence is not necessarily a prerequisite to progressing your development goals. However, achieving a certain level of development is necessary before you can discuss the independence question. And I like to think that development partners have sort of acted in this manner, recognizing the importance of putting development first, and you see it in the type of assistance and programs that are being accorded by development partners like the UN, ADB as well, building a new sort of level 4 hospital over in Buin. You also have the Bougainville Partnership Program with Australia and PNG, TSSP, for instance, holding capacity building workshops with internal local contractors as well. So these are more sort of geared towards development, not necessarily towards sort of independence readiness. And as well as that, with that being said, external partners are also aware of the dynamic that exists between PNG and Bougainville. And I think in sort of managing those external partnerships, they tend to maintain or prioritize maintaining sort of diplomatic relations with PNG and sort of respect the boundaries that have been set.
Another issue where you've got your gains and your losses is climate change. And I know you've all been in one way or the other involved in climate change negotiations or advancing interests with climate change. We've had disaster diplomacy where everybody tries to be the first one, to be the preferred partner, first responder. We've seen, though, I think the Pacific Island countries getting more and more assertive through their national disaster management organizations and other senior portfolios of who comes in, what they do, and how they engage with local communities. So I would be interested in your reflections in the climate change area of how geopolitics is shaping responses, whether that's for disaster response, financing, or international rules, and how the Pacific can keep pushing ahead to make sure their interests are being looked after given their very vulnerable state. So, Aka, I might start with you, given your doctoral studies, but then anybody else on the panel who wants to add in, feel free.
Yeah, thank you, Meg, for that question. I think it's an interesting one to sort of balance where we stand in terms of our friendship and what we want to leverage out of our partners as well. But the way I see it, geopolitics has certainly been the catalyst for a lot of possibilities around, you know, our climate options. And I'm looking at this in terms of labor mobility, because programs or mobility pathways that we spoke of some 10, 20, 30 years ago are now slowly coming into action, right? So we're seeing them, you know, surface now. So geopolitics certainly is, I guess, there was an issue that, the question that was raised by Ruth about whether these are genuinely motivated or not. But for me, I think it's certainly bringing the discussion around the topics that we barely touched in the past because none of the partners wanted to speak about. And now if you look at labor mobility, there's a lot more developments that have come on the back of the geopolitical competition. And so for me, I think it's a good thing, but it needs to be driven by the Pacific Islands. It needs to be consulted properly with us. These are programs that, you know, are coming to surface, but we want to have as much say on these programs as we can. And I think, Meg, it's important when we talk about climate change being a #1 security priority. As I said earlier, it's not so much the security of our partners' security interests, but in terms of climate change, I think the agreements that are coming out in terms of the Falapili, for example, with Tuvalu, the Pacific Engagement Visa, there's always a question there about whether these are genuinely motivated or not, but they're out there, and I think it provides opportunities for our people to take advantage of, and it's also up to our countries and our governments to really manage this efficiently and effectively to their own interest.
Any ways that they've done that particularly effectively, taken the lead?
Anyway, where we have done this, well, not in the labor mobility landscape. I think it's a very heated topic, right? If we consider migration and labor mobility now one of the most debated topic in the Pacific because of the layers and the arguments that come with it, that we are just repeating blackbirding or colonialism all over. But I guess there's a dual impact to all these issues, whether we're talking about climate change or labor mobility. And we're very slow in sort of saying what we want to see is translated in these agreements. For the Pacific, I think we want to see how the models in the free associated, the COFA countries, with the US, what's working there, what's not, and how can we also build on those lessons learned in the Pacific. Because like we're talking about a Pacific Engagement Visa, for example, in a PALM program that we are slowly entering into and becoming a part of the policy shaping, but not so much active leaders at this point. So how do we progress that from where we are is, I guess, depends on all our collaboration, but also the lessons that we see from across the region. Yep.
Thank you. To that question, I think what I would like to share is that I think I am one that is equally not satisfied with the conduct of my own leaders. I think that we are always, including me, we're focusing on how those other people behave, but we do not also look back at our own people. But the geopolitical competition that is going on will only weaken our resilience in terms of climate change. And what we are not talking about in that space is that China is emitting much more greenhouse gas than US is. And this does not come out. And yet all the logs and all the dirts of Solomon Islands are being extracted and sent to China. And what are they doing? That is my own leaders in Solomon Islands. What are they doing to contribute to this climate change to address this. All they could do is not to log more forest, but to look at that and how can we protect those? No, we're still logging, we're still mining, we're still not doing it lawfully either, and we're not contributing. So I think for us is, if you're a friend, then you should be seeing the needs, the developed needs of the people and the country, not the development agendas of the politician, which mostly does not reflect that of the people and country. Thank you.
That's one of the issues I wanted to look at, because we've talked a lot about the nation states, but we also have a lot of the finances that are flowing through international NGOs, and the expectations is they will partner with CSOs, the community service organizations, the local NGOs, and give that opportunity for development, but also be a check on the system by involving more than just governments, involving the NGO communities. But they too are subject to geopolitical pressures. So I'd be interested in your views on the non-governmental organizations and how they are engaging and influenced by geopolitics. Ruth, do you want to start?
Okay, I'll be very brief on this one. Ramsey was there, and it was there to fix our government, our machinery of government, all of that. Before the ethnic tension, we have a very vibrant and very vocal civil society sector, and that is the national civil society. After the tension, the only ways out there probably, and my colleagues probably will tell you that I'm telling lies, but only Transparency Solomon Islands is speaking up about this. Because all the others, the money is channeled through international NGOs, which is the response to fixing the NGO sector of Ramsey to them. And those, they have strings attached. So we are actually, to survive, the national NGOs or civil society organizations have to tick off the deliverables of those. There is no consultation in the design of the projects and all of that. So I think that donors should also think about when international NGOs, they apply for this bilateral that you allocate to our countries, you should be demanding that they do give you, provide for you what is the sustainable framework that will ensure those what they do on the ground is sustained. At the moment, in my travels throughout Solomon Islands, these huge ray boats, they're just lying there rotting away after the project. It's a waste of money. Nobody can handle that to go to the garden or anything like that. So I think you also need to look at the civil society organization, especially the national ones, because we can say what we need to say without having to worry about our relationship with the government, because we put the government inside there. So, and also the fact that the donors or development partners have changed their policy also affects the civil society voices at the national level, where they no longer support core budget. Where are we going to get core budget? You need human beings to do the talking, to do the running and all of that. They will only fund projects. So we really need to, now with this geopolitical issues that we have and our own issues as well, we really need a vibrant civil society sector, and the current strategy is not working, where you send us more and more international NGOs to be based in our country without any sustainability framework in place to sustain the work that they do. Thank you.
Maybe just adding on that also, I think I just want to acknowledge that the role of the civil society is quite influential in the Pacific when we look at things like climate change advocacy and other important issues to the Pacific. But sometimes it comes down to the politicization of issues, right? So sometimes they're forced to sort of work within the framing of the government of the day and whatever the messaging or priorities is. So, I mean, they're an effective part of society, and we need them to amplify the voices of the people that they represent, and supposedly the people most vulnerable in the scheme of things. So, yep, I'd like to see that there's a lot more collaboration with CSOs and governments.
We've talked now about CSOs, we've talked about NGOs, we've talked about security and government arrangements, but I think we have to reflect when we were talking about the Pacific taking leadership is the role of regional agencies and how they help to project priorities or even develop frameworks that help manage some of these issues, whether it's safeguards for labor mobility, whether it's legal frameworks that can be applied across different jurisdictions, whether it is setting security frameworks or resilience frameworks. So I'm interested in how you see regionalism, whether there's a need for greater Pacific integration to better manage geopolitical pressures, or whether really in the end this is going to come down to bilateral relations by and large with just a little bit of backup from these regional agencies. But we have just had the forum. We have a number of regional frameworks. Are they helping with geopolitical competition? Ollie, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, I think up until last week, I would have said that bilateral sort of arrangements are the way to go because of what we've seen. I think I think it was in 2022 when China sort of did the whirlwind tour trying to get the security agreement signed. And I guess the role and the effectiveness really of regional agencies depends on the value that's put to them by the individual Pacific countries themselves, right? And for a long time, I think I thought that, you know, forums like sort of like the Pacific Island Forum, for instance, was quite beneficial in an area like climate change, right? Not necessarily in security, but then from what we've seen last week is that it can be a platform for Pacific leaders to come together and agree on issues around security as well. So I think it really changes the dynamic based on purely that the forum last week. For a long time, I would have said bilateral security agreements because that's where sort of Pacific Island countries feel that their voices are being heard and they're not being grouped into sort of the rest of the Pacific and just sort of handed a package deal. So I think. Yeah, I think the regional organizations will play a significant role in assisting and sort of providing that technical assistance and capacity building to individual Pacific countries, and having that sort of be the hub for these individual Pacific countries to sort of lean on when assisting them in these sort of future geopolitical engagements.
I'd like to go with you because you have had experience with these regional agencies, but just having come back from the North Pacific, a very strong sentiment in the North Pacific is sub-regional organizations are really best suited to project your unique views and priorities. And while it's good to be involved in the larger regional organizations, in the end, dealing with geopolitics and the pressure, you need the sub-regional organizations as well. So I'd be interested in you reflecting on that kind of perspective on dealing with geopolitics through regional and sub-regional agencies.
Yeah, look, regionalism is important, right? And we see a regional architecture as a hub for all our development cooperation and coordination. But when we ask how this is translated into sub-regional settings. I guess coming from a small island and Micronesia, for example, how does this trickle down? Yeah, how do these development trickle down to the sub-regional level? And that's something that we've seen in the past with the sort of tension and fracture in our own regional architecture when we saw the Micronesians wanting to pull out, wanting to withdraw because their interests were not reflected in the regional system, and there will come times where we feel we're not quite heard or not fairly represented. So for me, regionalism is really how well that translates to that sub-regional level for us in Micronesia, but also to the other subgroupings in Melanesia and Polynesia. We feel like, there's a lot of issues that we are not quite getting addressed on our priorities, and that's where we measure the success of regionalism and especially sub-regionalism.
Sorry, and sort of just on that point as well, I think there's a peculiar role that has to be played by these sub-regional organizations, and I think they play a really important point in sort of contextualizing the greater sort of geopolitical engagements that are coming down to these individual countries, and sort of one of the, and the role that they play in sort of managing the geopolitics as well. And I think we saw this when Solomon Islands had their elections earlier this year, and they established a Solomon Islands Assistance Force, and I think that was a bit of a success story on how the sort of these Melanesian countries can sort of come together and assist in achieving a common goal. And I would have liked to see something a little bit similar be utilized when we had sort of the civil unrest over in New Caledonia. I feel like a role played by the sub-regional organizations in that, or at least or at least some sort of engagement at that level would have assisted in trying to reach a sort of resolve a lot earlier.
I think it was offered, I just think it wasn't accepted. So, Ruth, I also want you to have a say, because Solomon Islands has benefited from regional engagements. They're involved, obviously, in the PIF, but also in the Melanesian Spearhead Group. So they come and go in their commitment to the regional architecture, and I'm wondering if you wanted to share any reflections on regionalism in helping to manage some of the geopolitical pressures.
I mean, regionalism is the number one thing for the climate change, for this Blue Pacific vision of the PIPs. But to me, as an ordinary citizen, this is business as usual. They haven't brought the people along, so as long as they don't do that, whatever regionalism or whatever organization you're doing, if you don't bring the people along, and then if there's nothing there to impact positively on the people, then what more number by you mean do him, like by Platalem law. So we can go and form them stuck any kind of organization, but people, you stop law there, you mean law there. We cannot solve this if we don't bring the population along, because it's their resources, it's their country, and it's their life that we are dealing with. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to questions in a moment, but we did talk about, just to wrap up this Talanoa, we'd reflect on, and it's a bit of what Ruth was just talking about, bringing the people along, and allow each panel member to say if they had one priority message to the major geopolitical players about how they could advance the development and security priorities in the region, what would that message be out to those possibly listening here and looking for inspiration? Aka, do you want to begin?
Let me just put it this way. We need partners to listen to us more, sit with us and walk with us in all that we do. I think the days when we were very new nations and requiring the support of our partners are long gone now, and we are in that position where we can make decisions for our own selves. So yeah, listen to us more.
I guess one of the priorities is that, geopolitical engagement is really only as good as we make it. And to really have some longevity in the type of assistance that we receive and the impact to permeate from both the national down to the subnational level, I think Pacific Islanders themselves, or Pacific people, are the ones that need to take ownership of their own development and not expect it to be sort of given to them. And whether this is sort of like a natural progression of societal development or it requires a really big change in the thinking, I don't think it's very sustainable for Pacific countries to be, playing the role of manager, regulator of the type of development assistance that's coming in. And we sort of need to hold ourselves accountable and sort of lead from the front moving forward.
I think for me, as I just said, I think it would work if you bring the people along, and also don't do it for us, do it with us, and be genuine about it, not like the Pacific Island leaders community. When it comes to the civil society statement, and I was there in Cook Islands, they only gave me 3 minutes. That is not enough. But they gave those who have money a day, 1 hour, 2 hours, take them up to an island. They're not listening to their people thinking.
Well, with that inspiring comment, we wanted to keep this as a discussion, and so we wanted to also be able to have a discussion with all of you who've made the time to come. We also know there's a lot of Pacific Islands people in the audience, and they may have a view too that they want to share. So I would like to now just open it up, and we'll have a conversation. Who's got the roving mics here? Where are we? Okay, so if you could put your hand up, if you could, we'll take maybe, I'm just looking at the number of hands, we'll take 2 questions like we did in last time. So if you could just bring it up to the person with the hand up there. I think I saw one near the back. Is that right? Nobody likes to be the first, but where we go? Yeah, there you go. Just that lady up there.
You spoke about the media, Ruth, and the media's position in Solomon Islands. There was a Pacific Island media conference in Suva recently where there were journalists from, including the Media Association in Solomon Islands represented at this conference, and they talked about the same topic. And they said, you know, when we write stories that may seem pro-Chinese, or we write stories that may seem pro-Western Australian, you know, and you attack us, you forget that we are Solomon Island journalists, and we represent the people of Solomon Islands, that we're not pro-Chinese or we're not pro-Australian. And if you're going to talk about Chinese influence on the media in Solomon Islands, you have to also talk about Australian influence on the media in Solomon Islands through PACMAS and organizations like that. I'm not a representative of the Solomon Islands media. This was just something that was said there that I'm saying to you. It's very easy to attack the media because you're not getting enough coverage. When you talk about geopolitics, it's a divide, right? There's 2 sides that are contesting. Currently, you've got 3 speakers in front who are all funded by the Australians to come here and talk. How can you talk about a contest on ideas, on ideology, whatever, when you don't hear 2 sides of the story? I come from the Pacific. I'm still baffled about what the contest is about. What is it that the Americans, the Australians are trying to tell the Pacific Island that there is a contest about, that there is a fear about, that we need to worry about? We've lived with generations of old Chinese in Fiji, at least, you know, live side by side with Australians, and there isn't a contest at that level. What is it that we are being told that we need to fear?
Okay, so we'll
certainly
take that
not
one and
talking about it here.
Yeah, I don't think everybody here is actually funded by the Australian government or even Australian sources. But can we also take the question at the back there in the middle, and then we'll get some responses and then go on for another couple questions.
Thank you. The one thing that this has been a great panel discussion, really good to listen to, but one thing that was missing for me was any discussion around the role of the private sector. So we're seeing increasing presence of multinational companies in the Pacific, particularly extractive companies, oil and gas, especially in Papua New Guinea. So what do you think is the role or the influence of the private sector in shaping geopolitical discussions and priorities, and then national level development priorities as well?
Thank you, because that's the question I didn't get to, so I'm grateful for that. We'll start with the media, and Ruth, do you want to make any comments on that?
I think it's all good that they come and share those things inside these regional meetings, yeah? But inside Solomon Islands, our constitution is actually quite good. Media freedom, everything. What I know about Solomon Island media is that there is too much self-censor and not enough research. So I am here, yes, maybe I'm funded by DFAT or not, but DFAT and others know me very well. I have the best of the Western world education, but I also have the best of my traditional education as well. And my opinions are my opinions. It's not influenced by anybody else. Thank you.
So one was on media. There's a bit of a rebound back up here. So one was on media and media control and the engagement of both influenced by Chinese, Australian, American on media. And the second one was about the role of the private sector in geopolitics, particularly with the extractive industries.
I'll respond to the media question, and I want to underscore that the media provides a watchdog role to measure our level of democracy. So it's extremely important that the media has the freedom to exercise that right. And in a country where that is censored or under pressure, it becomes questionable.
In Kiribati, where the access of the media has been quite challenging through these elections as well, so that's been an issue. Ollie, coming from the country that has a lot of extractive industries, mining, logging, possibly seabed mining in the future, do you want to agriculture, oil palm, do you want to have any reflections on that with perhaps the local landowners and state control over resource extraction?
Yeah, this isn't really like an area that I've really delved into, so I won't probably give you a very good answer. But I think there are different. You can make an assessment on whether or not private sector engagement is, it's targeted towards national development, and there's a decision made purely, or it's purely a business decision, or if it's something that's something influenced by geopolitical competition. And I think there are different examples that you can pull from either one. And once again, I sort of draw back to the mental timeline that happened before, but I think one of the more obvious examples of, say, geopolitical engagement and sort of influenced business decisions was like the Telstra acquisition of Digicel. And I think you also see it in the extractive industry, like you mentioned, at the time when the Porgera gold mine, the agreement was up, and there was a long term of renegotiation as well. And what we've ended up with now is, I guess, more of a nationalization of the mine. But there's I think it's a straight split between ownership of the mine from Barrick, as well as there's a Chinese company as well. The name always escapes me. So I think there are different. There are different examples, but I think, I really can't give you a good answer. I think, as far as business is concerned, I think the governments like Papua New Guinea will be more concerned with what they contribute to sort of to national development, and I don't think it'll be used too much in terms of geopolitical, leveraging in that sense. Sorry, that's not a very good answer.
I think part of the answer was also when Ruth was talking about logging interests and the licenses that are being given for those. Certainly with mining, seabed mining also has become, in the words of the head of the SBC, the issue that could divide politically the region. So these investment patterns have implications. Sometimes they're political, but I think also sometimes it's the fallout that's political while commercial interests are being followed. Can we get another couple of questions? There's one in the middle and one right at the back. I should go to the other side of the room. Why don't we go to the back of the room because you're there, and then we'll come down to the person in the middle here.
Thank you, and congratulations to all our panelists for their insights. I'm just wondering if I heard it correctly. There was a mention of engagements with CSOs. So as a person with a disability, I'm just wondering whether there was any engagement with persons, with organizations or persons with disabilities in your respective countries, and whether there was any role that they play in terms of sharing their priorities, etc.
We'll get one more question that I think is right here in the very center of the auditorium.
Thank you. Sorry for being the most difficult one to get the microphone to. My name is David Lambourne. I'm from Kiribati, temporarily relocated to Australia. In the interest of full disclosure, my wife is the leader of the opposition in Kiribati. My question is for Aka. I think it's fair to say that in the last couple of years we've seen a dramatic shift in foreign policy by the Kiribati government, which seems to be marked by distinct hostility towards Western powers. We've seen the decision by Kiribati not to participate in the Pacific Engagement Visa. We've seen difficulties experienced by the New Zealand and Australian diplomatic missions in Kiribati in terms of engagement, to the extent that diplomats are being denied visas. We've seen the Kiribati government slow walking the efforts by the United States government to establish an embassy in Kiribati. I guess my question to you as a former Secretary for Foreign Affairs is, what do you see is driving this change? Are they geopolitical factors, or are they merely domestic things that are seen as more important than maintaining harmonious relations with old friends? Thank you.
We just have a hearing issue. That's why we're doing this consulting. I'll let Ruth talk about, though I don't think it's the answer you want, but on disabilities, I think Ruth was having a few mutterings here, so I'll let her go.
Okay, on engagement of people with disability, for Solomon Islands, there is no engagement. And also, not only people with disability, but everybody else, the citizens, are not engaged at all in any consultation for their opinion and everything else. On the private sector, I just want to touch on that one, is that a number of the people in the extractive industries now, actually, they are Australian citizens, Chinese Australian citizens, and also that they have properties and everything else here in Australia. So we cannot just say this is geopolitics. This is corruption in the private sector. Thank you.
I think that the question raised by the lady at the back on disability and how inclusive our policies are really strikes a chord to all of us, because we want to make sure that no one is left behind, and how the policies reflect the needs of all members of society, especially those with maybe special needs and circumstances. And David, in response to your question, what's driving geopolitical engagement in Kiribati and everything else that's happening? I think it's a mixture of all factors, I would say. That we are in the process of trying to decolonize, but at the same time build resilience and then take on what our partners offer to us. So the ability to sort of strike the balance and navigate through all these spaces can, I guess, be quite a tremendous effort on a small country or small economy like Kiribati. So I'm just going to respond by saying that we're in the process of really finding where we sit in all this, because we want to be friends with all, and at the same time really leverage our interest in this. I hope that answers the question. We can bilateral after.
Okay, Ruth wants to have a comment on that too. So we're not finished.
I think this what's driving this geopolitical thing that we are seeing here in inside the Pacific. I think it's also to be blamed on our Western development partners who have been, taking us around the circle, not being completely transparent, not listening to the ideas that we want and the things that we need in our country. And here is somebody who says, oh, we want to go and do awareness there, and say, here is the money, you go. This kind of thing. So I think our traditional partners have behaved inside the region has also pushed our leadership to go to this length. I think everybody forgot Solomon Islands, so I think Songaware went to get them. Now we get all your attention and you're back. Thank you.
I'm looking for my mic person, and there's two down here, because I think there's Denghua, and then the person behind Denghua, yeah? So, gentleman in the orange shirt. Display of great athleticism here.
I think he's doing a maneuver here that we blame the arrangement of the city. Anyway, by the way, I'm Mawa Gonapa. I'm from PNG, and I'm involved in climate change research, doing climate mitigation, doing carbon credits, offloading, securing markets, and all that kind of thing. But let me come to the theme of geopolitics movement in the Pacific. I think you see the uprise or the change in the movement, I think, and people are jumping up and down, in every island and every, states, they're saying, what do I get out of that? I think that's an important question to ask. And if you look at each individual country and you look at your socio-economic indicator or human development indicator, and if you have gained independence over years, what is your incremental growth over time? And now that you have that interventions, what is the adding value to your development aspiration and the socio-economic indicator? And I think that has to be factored in the agreement as the foremost. If you want to do a trade-off, for instance, if you want to do a trade-off for a military exchange, the obvious question that is posed by any community or any society is about what is my welfare? Is my welfare captured in the agreement? So I think I leave it to the panel to give your version, and I think my colleague from PNG, I think you've seen the clauses in the agreement. What does it entail about the welfare of the people when there is somebody is coming and setting up a trade store or a military base out there or whatever? What is the gain for the community in terms of enhancement in the welfare and the livelihood?
Thank you, Meg. Actually, this is not a question, but some comments. Yeah, and based on my recent research, series of research on the local perceptions of the geopolitics, especially about the Chinese role in the region. And I hope that might be useful to enrich our debates and discussions on this topic. The first relates to the local NGOs' perceptions about the China. Ruth talked about some of the views in Solomon Islands. How do the Solomon Islands, the NGOs perceive the China? I did a research project 2 to 3 years ago in Fiji, PNG, and also Tonga about how the NGOs in these 3 countries perceive the China issue. And the finding that there's been serious problem for China to engage, for China's engagement with the local NGOs in these 3 countries. Just to give you some examples. One, that all of those NGOs I surveyed in PNG and also in Fiji said they have never received, they have never applied for and received any aid or grants from China. And they said in the future they will not apply for any aid from China. These are for the NGOs in Fiji and in PNG. And slightly better in Tonga, a small proportion of those surveyed NGOs in Tonga said they are interested in applying for some Chinese grants in the future. So this, I think, relates to what Ruth has mentioned about the the critical views held by the local NGOs in Solomon Islands or in the Pacific about the China issue. Second, relates to a project I conducted with a local colleague in Solomon Islands. We surveyed a good number of those university students at the Solomon Islands National University, and 80% of the students said they supported the BRI, because Oliver mentioned the BRI, yeah. So 80% of those survey students said they supported BRI, and about 60% of them said they do not support their government to borrow from China to finance development in Solomon Islands. So they do not support the Chinese loans. And 70% of them said they think traditional donors' concerns about the China-Solomon Islands security agreement make sense. So 70% of the surveyed Solomon Islands, that's university students, they think traditional donors' concern about the China-Solomon Islands security agreement makes sense. Yeah. Last point. Sure.
Your paper is well published, and anybody who wants to read more, it's actually quite an interesting paper, and it adds some great insights that they can talk to Benoit about getting that. Ollie, do you want to comment on the question prior to that about climate change, climate mitigation, and what do we get from it?
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, was it necessarily focused on climate change, but greater sort of geopolitical engagement, and really what is the gain from that, it trickles down to people at the grassroots level? Is that sort of the question that was being asked?
Yeah, I think it's flowing down to that direction.
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, so what really are the tangible benefits, right?
Or at a national scale, or is it now going to be at a community level? I mean, people have actually, they want to see some increment in their sort of welfare, improve livelihood and so on and so forth. So maybe speak to that.
Or take your own interpretation and run with it all.
Yeah, I'll have to be careful about how I answer this question, like I mentioned. I'll try and answer it without being too vague, but also actually answering the question as well. Yeah, I don't want to get fired when I get back. I think it's definitely taken into consideration as well how these agreements will benefit ordinary citizens, right? I think a greater question now, because everything seems to make sense, and this is my own personal observation, everything seems to make sense retrospectively. And you look at how these were negotiated, I think we start to realize that, and I talked about it briefly, Pacific Island countries don't understand that they actually have a lot of leverage that they can use to negotiate at the table to get what they really want out of it. And I think what we've seen over time is how big these impacts are and how well that benefits people at the grassroots level. It's reflected when you make that assessment. It's sort of reflected, and one of us talked about it as well. There's a bit of a disconnect between the decision-making process, or those in decision-making authority, and those who are the intended beneficiaries of geopolitical engagement. And I think to fix that issue, what you need to do, if you want to increase the impact of engagement in that sense, then those who are the beneficiaries need to be able to actively participate in the decision-making process. That's the best I can give you right now, to be honest.
Yeah, and just building on that, I think, the last few days has been quite a lot of listening for us, and we've heard about the research work that everyone is doing, and so it makes me wonder how much research are we going to continue to be doing, and how are this research adding up to implementing, what the research is asking us to do. In terms of climate change financing and how we can bring the money directly to the people most affected, I think it comes down to everything that we're doing. How do we center the people and communities in our studies and facilitate, accelerate these benefits to get them faster. But for me, it's also about access to this financing, because we will need to build up to a certain level of, we saw this with the Green Climate Fund, the experience with the Green Climate Fund, but then now recently we have projects, for example, in Kiribati, where half the money goes to consultants, paying for overseas consultants, and very little is actually seen as evidence on the ground on what would perhaps solve the seawater intrusion problem in Kiribati, for example. And so for me, I think, are we still researching for the purpose of researching, or are we really connecting the dots and seeing that the tangible outputs really do come out and impact those that needs to be, benefited in all this?
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up at the Australian National University. A great challenge to us and to all the academics here. So that's great. I'd like to thank the panel. I'm not even going to try and summarize that huge terrain that we have traversed in this last hour and a bit. But before you go, Tony Regan's just going to come up and say a few words to... well, I don't even know what you're going to talk about, Tony, but I'm sure it's going to be important. So here you go.
Thanks, Meg. Just a couple of quick things. One, we haven't drawn your attention to a little line on the program for this afternoon. At 5 o'clock, Karen Baker will be presenting on the Pacific Attitude Survey, Vanuatu, that the Department of Pacific Affairs has been working on with Michael Leach from Swinburne, who's maybe not in this. Yes, he is. They've done one in Samoa, and then last year, another in Vanuatu. So they'll be reporting on that. So please don't forget, even though it's a small line at the bottom of the program. That's here in the Coombs. And I've asked Jesse to do the same announcement on the other side in the Headley Bull. Second thing is, tomorrow there's a half-day workshop on Bougainville in 2024. We've put out flyers outside in the atrium. If you're interested, please come. I think there's about 60 people already registered to attend and about 70 or 80 online, so there's quite a bit of interest. And